Silver has quietly shaped the modern world in ways most people never notice. It powered ancient empires, built global trade routes, drove industrial revolutions, fueled the rise of photography and electronics, and today it sits at the heart of solar power, electric vehicles, medical technology, and communication systems. Yet the world is now discovering an uncomfortable truth. The silver supply chain that supports modern civilization is fragile, concentrated, and historically shaped by decisions made decades or even centuries ago. This is the true, fact-based story of how silver became one of the most indispensable and strategically vulnerable resources on the planet. Silver's story is one of the longest, most globally intertwined narratives in human economic history, beginning long before modern financial markets existed and continuing into the 21st century as one of the world's most essential industrial metals. And to understand the real structure, vulnerabilities, and geopolitical pressures of today's silver supply chain, we have to trace its development from ancient civilizations through the colonial era, the rise of global trade networks, the industrial revolutions, the modern mining boom, and finally the tightening supply-demand conditions of the past 2 decades. Historically, silver held an economic power matched by very few materials, serving as money in ancient Mesopotamia, in the Greek city-states, across the Roman Empire, throughout dynastic China, and later in the Aztec and Inca empires, because unlike gold, which was valued primarily for wealth storage, silver became the backbone of everyday commerce due to its relative abundance, divisibility, and metallurgical properties, making it the true working metal of the world for thousands of years. And by the time Spanish explorers arrived in the Americas in the 16th century, global trade was about to be transformed permanently by the massive silver deposits at Potosí in modern-day Bolivia and Zacatecas and Guanajuato in Mexico, where the Spanish Empire extracted unimaginable quantities of silver using forced labor systems like the Mita, shipping thousands of tons across the Atlantic to Seville and across the Pacific through the Manila Galleon route to China, which had adopted silver as its primary currency under the Ming dynasty. The global movement of silver during the 1500s and 1600s was so immense that historians often describe it as the world's first truly integrated international commodity cycle, linking Latin American mines, Spanish ports, Chinese markets, and European banking houses, and this historical dependence on silver as a monetary metal continued through the 19th century, even after the rise of central banking systems, with countries like the United States adopting bimetallic monetary standards and producing vast quantities of silver coinage from domestic mines in Nevada, Idaho, and Colorado, the most famous being the Comstock Lode discovered in 1859, which by itself produced over 8 million kilograms of silver during its peak decades and played a major role in financing westward expansion. But silver's significance shifted dramatically in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as industrialization accelerated and new uses for the metal expanded far beyond coinage. The development of photography, electrical engineering, chemical catalysts, and later electronics and medicine fundamentally changed the demand profile for silver, making it both a monetary and industrial resource. And this dual identity produced repeated cycles of supply strain, policy tension, and price volatility. When the 19th century demonetization of silver occurred, such as the U.S. Coinage Act of 1873, sometimes called the Crime of 1873 by its critics, the metal's economic role changed again, with government demand slowing but industrial demand steadily rising, leading to the 20th century's most important structural transition. Silver evolved from money to technology metal, a shift that continues to define its market today. Meanwhile, the geography of silver mining also shifted, with Mexico reclaiming its position as the world's largest producer, Peru emerging as a dominant source, and new production expanding in China, Poland, and later Australia, while the United States saw its production decline significantly after the mid-20th century, creating long-term patterns of dependency that still influence American industries today. The most profound transformation began after World War II when the rapid expansion of consumer electronics, photography, and chemical industries dramatically increased silver consumption, leading to a famous historical moment in 1965 when the U.S. Mint facing rising silver demand and limited domestic supply, removed silver from circulating coinage, ending over 170 years of silver-based American currency. By the 1970s, silver became the center of one of the most dramatic episodes in financial history. The Hunt brothers' attempt to corner the global silver market by purchasing enormous physical quantities and futures contracts, driving the price from under $6 per ounce in 1978 to nearly $50 per ounce in January 1980, a price spike that led to market reforms, volatility, and eventually a collapse known as Silver Thursday, underscoring the metal's susceptibility to both real industrial pressures and speculative forces. After the collapse of the photography industry due to digital imaging in the early 2000s, many analysts predicted a prolonged decline in silver demand, but they were wrong. Silver's industrial importance only deepened because of its unique physical properties: the highest electrical conductivity of any metal, the highest thermal conductivity, and exceptional chemical stability, making it indispensable in solar photovoltaic cells, automotive electronics, medical devices, water purification systems, and advanced semiconductor manufacturing. And by the 2010s, silver had quietly become one of the world's critical energy transition metals, with solar panel production alone consuming hundreds of millions of ounces annually. This dramatic rise in industrial consumption collided with another structural issue. Global mine supply was no longer keeping pace with demand, and for much of the 2010s and 2020s, the world experienced recurring annual silver deficits documented by the Silver Institute, often ranging from 30 to over 100 million ounces per year. And these deficits were driven not only by industrial growth, but by deeper geological and economic realities, particularly the fact that only about 25% of silver comes from primary silver mines, while the remaining majority is produced as a byproduct of mining copper, lead, zinc, and gold, meaning that silver supply cannot easily expand even when prices rise because mine output depends on the economics of other metals. Meanwhile, the global distribution of silver production became increasingly uneven, with Mexico and Peru consistently ranking as the world's two largest producers, followed by countries like China, Chile, Russia, and Bolivia, while the United States produced only a small fraction of the world's supply, typically around 800 to 1,100 metric tons annually, and depended heavily on imports to support domestic industrial consumption. At the same time, global refining and processing capacity became concentrated in a handful of nations, especially China, which grew in the late 20th and early 21st centuries to become a leading global hub for metal refining, including silver, cementing its central role in the world supply chain for a wide range of industrial materials. China's industrial rise was accompanied by significant domestic silver consumption driven by its booming electronics manufacturing, rapidly expanding solar industry, and broader economic growth, making it one of the world's largest silver consumers as well as a major producer. And this combination of production and consumption placed China in a position of increasing influence over global silver flows, similar to its role in other critical metals like rare earth elements, tungsten, germanium, and antimony. Historically, China has used export quotas, licensing systems, or other regulatory frameworks for various strategic minerals, especially in the 2010 rare earths episode when export restrictions triggered global price spikes and led to World Trade Organization disputes. And although these policies primarily targeted rare earths rather than silver, they illustrate China's ability to influence global supply chains for industrial metals through regulatory tools and state-managed industrial strategy. While the U.S. government did not historically classify silver as a critical mineral, this position evolved as industries such as solar energy, medical technology, and advanced electronics grew increasingly dependent on stable silver supplies, and the U.S. Geological Survey, along with international organizations, began publishing research on silver's supply risks, recycling limitations, and geological constraints, emphasizing that unlike some metals, silver is consumed rather than recycled in many industrial applications due to economic and technical limitations, meaning that a significant portion of silver used in solar panels, electronics, and medical devices becomes unrecoverable, contributing to long-term structural deficits. The global Silver reserves documented by reputable geological agencies show that while there are substantial known deposits in countries like Mexico, Peru, Australia, Poland, and China, the rate of new discoveries has slowed compared to the expansion of industrial demand and the development timeline for new mines. Often 7 to 15 years due to environmental permitting, financing challenges, and technical requirements, means that supply cannot respond quickly to demand surges. Historically, this imbalance has produced price volatility, especially during periods of economic or geopolitical tension, but the underlying dynamics remain driven by real geological constraints and industrial consumption patterns rather than speculative narratives. The world's silver supply chain today is the product of centuries of evolution, from ancient monetary systems to colonial extraction networks, from industrial revolutions to globalized supply chains, from the rise of photography to the solar era, and this long history explains why modern industries face structural vulnerabilities, not because of sudden fictional collapses or speculative events, but because silver remains a physically limited, geographically concentrated, industrially indispensable material. The real story is that global silver deficits have become increasingly common. Industrial demand keeps rising. Primary mining projects face long lead times. Recycling cannot fully offset consumption, and geopolitical concentration of refining and fabrication capacity creates strategic dependencies, especially for countries like the United States that rely on imports to meet domestic needs. Understanding this historical context provides the foundation for analyzing today's real challenges, not speculative future crises, but factual structural pressures built over decades, including increasing industrial competition between nations, long-standing supply deficits, and the continued concentration of refining and manufacturing capacity in key countries, making silver one of the most strategically important metals of the 21st century, not because of dramatic fictional collapse scenarios, but because of the real, documented, measurable history that shaped its current global supply chain. The story of global silver and the role it has played in shaping economies, geopolitical relationships, monetary systems, and industrial breakthroughs enters an even more complex phase as modern demand begins to accelerate beyond anything the world saw in previous centuries. And to understand the scale of this transformation, we must trace the deeply interconnected forces, historical, technological, financial, and cultural, that continue to influence the metal's position in the 21st century. Because silver is not just a mineral extracted from the earth, it is a material that has served as currency, as a strategic resource, as a financial asset, and as an industrial backbone in ways that few commodities have. After the demonetization of silver in most major economies during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, driven by the global shift toward the gold standard, silver's influence did not disappear. Instead, it transitioned into new roles that made it increasingly essential in modern technology. This transition began slowly, with photography becoming one of the earliest industrial users of silver, especially after the development of silver halide processes that dominated commercial imaging from the late 1800s until the early 2000s. During this period, millions of kilograms of silver were consumed annually for film, X-ray imaging, and motion picture production, creating a reliable industrial demand that supplemented its long-standing use in jewelry, cutlery, and traditional crafts. But even while photography was rising, governments around the world continued to hold large silver reserves, and the metal remained embedded in monetary systems in various indirect ways. For example, the United States Silver Purchase Act of 1934 required the Treasury to acquire huge amounts of silver, affecting global prices and strengthening the role of silver-producing regions across the Americas. China, too, remained deeply connected to silver throughout the early 20th century because its economy had operated on a silver-based currency system for centuries, making it one of the most silver-dependent nations in the world before modern monetary reforms. As the mid-20th century approached, silver's importance expanded dramatically due to new technological discoveries. Silver's extraordinary conductivity, both electrical and thermal, made it indispensable for electronics, and when the semiconductor revolution began in the 1950s and 1960s, silver quickly became a required material for switches, contacts, solder, and circuitry. Meanwhile, photography continued to grow, military equipment required more silver than ever, and civilian industries used silver in an increasing range of applications. The United States, which had historically been one of the largest silver producers, found itself simultaneously needing silver for industry, minting, and wartime logistics, creating frequent tensions between supply and demand. A major turning point came in the 1960s when the U.S. government, after facing years of silver shortages and rising industrial pressure, removed silver from circulating coinage in 1965. Before this reform, American coins such as dimes, quarters, and half dollars contained significant silver content, but industrial modernization forced policymakers to rethink metal allocation. Removing silver from currency allowed the government to free up reserves for more strategic purposes, but it also signaled the end of an era in which silver served as a direct foundation of everyday monetary systems. Global dynamics also shifted as new mining regions rose to prominence. Countries like Mexico, Peru, and Bolivia, which had been major producers since the Spanish colonial era, continued to dominate silver mining through the 20th century, while nations such as Canada, Australia, and China expanded their output. These trends reshaped global supply structures and created new strategic dependencies between industrialized nations and resource-rich regions. At the same time, the price of silver experienced major volatility, influenced by both real industrial demand and speculative financial activity. The most famous event was the Hunt brothers' attempt to corner the silver market in the late 1970s. By aggressively buying physical silver and futures contracts, they drove prices from under $10 per ounce to nearly $50 in 1980, leading to one of the most dramatic commodity market episodes in modern financial history. The bubble eventually collapsed after regulatory intervention, but the event underscored silver's potential to cause large-scale financial disruption and revealed how sensitive the market could be to coordinated buying pressure. Following the collapse of the silver bubble, demand did not decline. Instead, it diversified. The rise of computing, telecommunications, medical devices, and renewable energy technologies all contributed to a steady rise in silver consumption. Perhaps the most crucial development in recent decades has been silver's central role in solar photovoltaic technology. Silver paste is used to create conductive pathways in solar cells, and as global investment in green energy has surged, solar panel production has become one of the fastest-growing sources of physical silver demand. China, the world's largest solar panel manufacturer, consumes a significant portion of global silver supply for photovoltaic production, linking its industrial expansion directly to silver demand. This development mirrors older historical patterns where technological revolutions, whether photography, electrification, or digital communications, created new silver-dependent industries that reshaped the global economy. Another important factor in modern silver history is the shift in the relationship between above-ground stockpiles and annual industrial consumption. In earlier centuries, silver accumulated in large, easily accessible reserves within government vaults, religious institutions, private treasuries, and household jewelry. These stores acted as buffers during supply shortages. But over the past 50 years, much of the world's recoverable silver stockpile has been gradually consumed by industry. Unlike gold, which is rarely destroyed and is almost always recycled because of its high value, much of the silver used in electronics, solar panels, solder, and chemical processes ends up in forms that are extremely costly or technically difficult to recycle. As a result, a substantial portion of modern silver becomes permanently unrecoverable, effectively removing it from global supply. This structural change, consumption outpacing recoverable recycling, has become one of the most important and underreported developments in modern silver economics. Meanwhile, mining faces its own long-term challenges. Silver is rarely mined as a primary metal. In fact, more than 70% of global silver production is a byproduct of mining other ores such as copper, lead, and zinc. This limits the ability of miners to scale silver production independently because it depends heavily on the economic conditions of other metal markets. For example, if global copper demand slows and copper mines reduce output, silver production can decline even if silver demand rises. This byproduct dynamic has shaped global supply constraints throughout modern history and continues to influence long-term supply forecasts today. The geological reality is also important. Rich, easily accessible silver deposits, such as those once found in Nevada's Comstock Lode, Bolivia's Cerro Rico, and Mexico's Zacatecas region, were heavily exploited during the 19th and early 20th centuries. While many mines still operate, or grades have fallen consistently, and extracting large quantities of silver now requires significantly more energy, technology, and financial investment. At the global trade level, silver has played a vital role in shaping relationships between major economies. China, historically one of the world's largest consumers of silver, has also become a substantial producer in recent decades. The United States, once a major producer, has become increasingly dependent on imports to meet domestic industrial needs. Japan, South Korea, and Germany rely heavily on silver for precision manufacturing, automotive electronics, robotics, and energy technologies. Across Southeast Asia, silver is essential for electronics manufacturing hubs that produce components for global brands. These interconnected supply chains mean that silver shortages, price spikes, or geopolitical disruptions could have significant ripple effects on global technology production. In finance, silver remains a key asset for investors who view it as both a hedge against inflation and a store of value in times of economic uncertainty. While gold typically receives more attention in financial markets, silver often experiences sharper price movements due to its smaller market size, creating opportunities and risks for investors. Exchange-traded funds, ETFs, introduced in the early 2000s, made it easier for institutional and retail investors to gain exposure to silver, increasing financial participation in the market. However, unlike gold ETFs, which mostly represent metal that sits idle in vaults, silver ETFs face the challenge of maintaining adequate physical supplies because silver's industrial use continues to absorb available inventory. This dynamic has created persistent debates within financial circles about whether paper silver markets are appropriately backed by physical metal, with some analysts arguing that industrial demand outpacing mining supply could create future stresses within the system. In the medical field, silver's antimicrobial properties, recognized since ancient times, have gained new relevance with the rise of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Silver nanoparticles are now used in wound dressings, medical instruments, water purification systems, and antimicrobial coatings for hospital environments. This represents another example of silver's long-running transition from a monetary resource to a critically important industrial metal whose value derives from its physical properties rather than its historical monetary role. Silver's cultural and economic significance also remains strong. In India, for example, silver jewelry and decorative items are deeply woven into family traditions, religious ceremonies, and social customs. In Mexico and South America, silver craftsmanship, such as Tasca jewelry and Andean silver work, remains an important cultural and economic activity. Across the Middle East and Southeast Asia, silver ornaments and household items continue to hold social and cultural value. These markets ensure that even outside industrial applications, silver maintains ongoing demand driven by craftsmanship, tradition, and cultural identity. Across all these developments, the broader historical perspective reveals an unmistakable pattern. Silver's role has continuously evolved to match the needs of each technological era. In ancient times, it powered trade and currency systems. In colonial times, it fueled empires and global economic networks. In the industrial era, it supported photography, electrification, and manufacturing. In the modern digital age, it has become essential for electronics, medical technology, renewable energy, and precision manufacturing. Through every historical transformation, silver has proven uniquely adaptable, maintaining its relevance by aligning with the technological and economic shifts of each period. As the world continues to innovate, developing more advanced electronics, cleaner energy systems, faster communication networks, and more efficient industrial processes, silver's foundational properties keep it at the center of global technological progress. This long and complex history, stretching from ancient civilizations to the cutting-edge technologies of the 21st century, underscores one unbroken truth. Silver has always been more than a precious metal. It has been a resource that quietly powers the world.